Welcome to Demand and Disrupt, the Disability Podcast. Here, we will learn to advocate for ourselves and each other. This podcast is supported with funds from the Advocado Press, based in Louisville, Kentucky.
Good morning. Welcome to the Demand and Disrupt podcast. I'm your host, Lisa McKinley. Today, we are with Matt Davis. Matt Davis is the Assistant Director of the Student Accessibility Resource Center on the campus of Western Kentucky University. Good morning, Matt. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Lisa. How are you doing this morning?
I am great. We are so excited to have you on. I've known Matt for a long time now, probably 20-something years.
Met him. 20-something years.
Yes, 20-something years. I think I actually met you before I became a student at Western. You were doing road races, and I was at a road race with my sister, and you were there, and that's how I met you. I'm like, this dude's cool.
And I started racing in 97, so that's had to have been sometime around when I first started.
Tell us about yourself, a little more about yourself and about your position at Western.
Okay. I am from Bowling Green, Kentucky. I grew up here. We moved here when I was a little kid. When my father got a position at WKU, we moved from Lexington to Bowling Green. So I pretty much grew up here in the Bowling Green area. I am an adult with spina bifida. I was born with spina bifida, so I also have a disability as well. I have my bachelor's and master's in social work from WKU. I also do, as you well know and had mentioned before, also have been passionate about adaptive sports for over 20 years now. My main sport is wheelchair racing, but I've played wheelchair basketball and tennis and softball and sled hockey and so many other things. And so I always make the joke that I'm only doing this WKU gig so I can feed my sports habit. So that's a little bit about my background. What I do at WKU is, as you mentioned, I'm the Assistant Director for the Student Accessibility Resource Center. And what I do is make sure that students who have a documented disability, that they disclose their disability to the university, make sure that they have all the resources that they need to take advantage of, or they can take advantage of, to make sure that they have that equal opportunity success during their college career. And that can vary from, classroom accommodations to housing to finding tutoring assistance to oftentimes just being, a listener. So people ask me what a normal day is, and there really isn't such a thing. It seems to be something different every day, which I like. It's hard to believe that I've been here this long. This will be my 22nd year here at WKU as an employee.
I would like to spend some time talking about the importance of self-advocacy, because we can have people advocate for us all day long, but I think the ability to advocate for one's self is so important. Can you talk a little about advocating for oneself as a college student and really how important that is?
Sure. And a lot of times when I speak to at conferences, or even if I'm speaking to a classroom of students here on campus, oftentimes what I'll mention is one of the most important things I do in my role. A lot of things you can learn on a job. You can learn how to do different, the process for providing accommodations. But I think helping students become their own advocates once they get to college, I think, is one of the more important roles that I have, because a lot of times students in general oftentimes have had a lot of things in their life done for them up until they get to the college level, but it seems to be more prevalent in the disability community, as far as even not just as far as schoolwork and those types of challenges, but also just daily living skills. And so I think that because I think that's part of my role here, is to help students make that transition into college. And, they are adults. I tell people, I'm using my quote fingers, adults, but they still have those responsibilities that they haven't had before, oftentimes in their life. Not just getting to class, but how to navigate to get groceries, how to navigate to get, their medicines that they need, or their supplies that they need, or making doctor's appointments. So oftentimes I'll get those requests. Students at the university, when they request accommodations, we don't, they do that through a process through our office, and we provide them with what we call a faculty notification letter to their email, and they provide those to their professors to request the accommodation. So that's part of that process, is to let the student be in control of when or if they want to request accommodations for their classes. And so they have that letter, and they need to provide that to professors. We don't do that. And so I tell students, college is all about choices. And once you get to college, it's your choice as whether or not to use the accommodations. Always recommend that students provide their letter of accommodation or their faculty notification letter at the beginning of the semester. And then everything's in place. And if you want to just try the class without accommodations, then, that's also their choice. And also students will oftentimes request that I contact their professors, or if they will contact this department on campus, and I'll tell them a couple of things. What I'll do is I said, well, reach out to your professor at this department, and you can copy me, and I'll even sometimes help a student formulate an email to them. And then that way, that helps them to kind of take over that role of asking for help around campus and getting into that routine of asking for that extra help that they need. And so those are some of the things that I see myself in. And one of the things that helped me, I think, when I was younger, I first attempted college at an early age and didn't do so well and had to drop out, and I went back later. And so those students that I see that are struggling, or lack of a better term, maybe goofing off or not taking college as serious, I can't really be really judgmental, because I see myself in them. And so I try to start where they are. And so that's part of that as well. Because some students even hesitate who have accommodations, especially those students who have what we call a hidden disability. Oftentimes they're even hesitant to even reach out to our office. And so I think just encouraging them that they made that first step to at least go through the process to get help from us is an important part of that advocacy process.
Encouragement is a huge thing. Just to have somebody there beside you, letting you know you can do this and this is how you might want to go about it. That is huge. So if you can, tell us maybe something a student might run into with a class. How are some ways in the classroom they might have to advocate for themselves?
Okay, that's a good question. Oftentimes students who, I'll give you an example, that some students who have accommodations may have accommodations for testing. And so what we require them to do, and when I mean testing, maybe they need extended testing time, or a separate place to take exams, or sometimes even a reader. And so what we have that student do is, when they need our offices where students can come and take their exams, and so we require them to fill out a testing form. And so some of the issues they might face in the classroom is maybe, and a lot of students, not just students with disabilities, but the time management factor. Being able, because, a lot of times students transition into college, they've been used to their parents saying, have you done your homework? You need to get up and go to school. You need to, go to your tutoring sessions. And so teaching students with the time management, I think this helps. As an example, is filling out that testing form. And so that way because they're required to, or we try to require them to do that at least 3 to 5 days in advance. Obviously, we get requests that are, say, the day before, and we try to accommodate. But that's part of that learning process and that self-advocacy piece. And some of the challenges, sometimes they run into challenges where the professors are either less willing or don't understand the accommodations. And so that's why I try to help facilitate that educational piece to the professors, so students don't run into those types of barriers, because we want them to focus on their studies and not having to fight with professors to get their accommodations.
So I'm sure a lot of it is professors just not really maybe knowing exactly what a student needs, and once sometimes you will have to step in and maybe say, these are the accommodations this student needs.
Right. And we when we determine the accommodations, it's a partnership with the student and one of our staff here. So we just don't tell them these are the accommodations you're going to get. It's a collaborative process. So they kind of feel like they have that power in their own hands of getting that help that they need.
It's an amazing resource, and I wish sometimes I had taken advantage of it more when I was a student. I remember having one professor who refused to allow me to take an exam in private. He wanted to whisper the answers to me, or that he was proctoring the test in front of the entire class while the class was also taking their test, but he was trying not to interrupt the class, so he's kind of whispering it. And that was the hardest test I ever took, because I mean, that's not a good test environment. And I think if I would have had the courage to speak up and call the student disability coordinator, I think I probably would have had more success in that class. So speak to that when students might be afraid to advocate for themselves, and like, how do they find their voice?
I think, I do understand, because I was a student, as I tell students, I was a student 100 years ago. And so I remember, students oftentimes are apprehensive about challenging professors, as they may see it as challenging professors, or we see it as advocating for themselves, because if they're in that course, they oftentimes may be concerned about retaliation from the professor if they push for, those needed accommodations. But I always tell students, when I meet with future students, current students, and even sometimes with their parents, I always tell students that our office is not just for the accommodations, the Student Accessibility Resource Center. It's also a place where students can get help for, or at least pointed in the right direction for everything WKU. So that's what the disability office should be. So if a student needs to know, I need to check on how to do my financial aid for next year, well, somebody in our office should point that student, or at least help them get the information they need so they can start that process. And so I think that's part of that. Sometimes the apprehension is that confrontation, but let someone in the disability services office, sometimes we always talk about, oftentimes, about self-advocacy, but I think oftentimes too, the disability services office is also there to be an advocate for the student in these situations. And so I think that's where they need to understand that they're not on their own, that we're here to support them and to reach out whenever they need that help.
I think that's a huge thing. I think there's a lot of students out there who, maybe in high school right now, thinking about going to college, but then they look at their disability and they say, no, maybe this isn't for me. And they're overwhelmed by everything that might be involved. And so your office can really step in and help them navigate, and help them to start to learn to self-advocate, and also to be there as a voice for them when it gets challenging, or when they might need somebody to intercede on their behalf. So what would you say to someone who's thinking about going to college, but like I said, they're overwhelmed by all of the prospects of it all?
One of my first pieces of advice is to reach out, even if you're in high school, to reach out to an office like mine on the campus that you're interested in going to, just to have a meeting. I usually tell students two things. First off, one is make sure that the disability services office is a good fit as far as, meeting your needs, but also a college that may have a program that you're interested in, if you know what you're interested in your career. And so those are two things that I often tell students, give advice to. But looking at the campus, meeting with someone on the campus, meeting with the disability services office can kind of break down maybe that. I always tell students, I get this question quite a bit, sometimes even from parents. It's interesting that sometimes parents will talk about their children, their son or daughter that's with them, and they talk about them like they're not even in the room. And then I had to do this the other day. I was talking to a prospective student, and mom was answering all the questions. And I said politely to the mom, I said, "I'm speaking to your son." And so he started answering questions that I had and opened up. So that's part of that process of kind of letting that, the old adage or the old saying, cutting the cord for the parents. And so letting them answer those own questions. So always try to direct those questions towards the student. But if the prospective student, it meets the general requirements for being accepted to WKU, which they don't take disability into consideration. They don't ask you if you have a disability, whether or not you're going to be accepted to a university. If they meet those requirements, then it's more, my perspective is more of not can we make this work, but how can we make this work? And so that's where that partnership comes into play. I have a role, the student has a role, and together we can try to make this work. It may take some adjustments over the course of weeks or the semester, but if we all work together, I think we can make this a goal of working towards a graduation and getting a degree.
You actually kind of touched on my next question in the story about the mom answering all the questions.
Right.
There are probably some parents out there listening, and they may not be, completely aware of the possibilities that are out there for their children. They may have been the biggest mouthpiece of the advocacy over the years. What would you say to parents about stepping back and allowing their children to take over that advocacy process themselves?
I don't want to give the impression that we want to completely shut parents out, but we want to ease that transition where the student kind of takes over that role, because it is an important part of, if they have a support system, whether it's a parent or someone that they rely on that's in that role, it's important that they be involved in that process in the beginning, because that might be something that they can provide insight to us or to the student, or make it a collaborative effort. But I think moving it towards letting the student or the future student kind of take on that role themselves. I just wanted to emphasize that, we obviously meet with parents and students when they're not at the college level yet, just to go over the process, and we want to involve them as much as we can. I use the example sometimes when I speak to classes that my first attempt at college, I lived in one of the residence halls, and I was trying to learn my independent skills, and I called my mother on the phone, and I said, "Mom, whenever I'm doing laundry, do I mix the color clothes in with the white clothes whenever I'm doing laundry?" And she said, "You figure it out." So after a couple of pairs of pink underwear, I figured it out that maybe you shouldn't mix them together. So, it's sort of that learning. We prepare students. The reason why I mention that is we prepare students as much as you can, but there's going to be setbacks, and realizing that if you learn from those setbacks and you ask for help and take advantage of the resources, being persistent and don't give up, and, getting that help you need, I think is an important piece of being successful in college.
So I'm hearing you say that, having your support systems in place is very important. So it's kind of a balance between, letting your parents or guardians be that support system, but not that over reliance on them.
That's correct.
I'm glad you touched on that, because that's really important, because you can't really go at this alone. We all need our support systems. What do you wish you would have known when you were a college student that you know now, that you've learned from this whole process?
I think that what I wish I had, what you could tell your past self is what I had mentioned earlier before, is just taking advantage of all the help. I have a former professor of mine who ended up being my boss and was a mentor. He passed away about 10 years ago. Dr. David Coffey had a great saying in the class. A student would ask, what's the best way to get a good grade in this class? And he would say, "Get your ass to class to pass." And so I always remember that phrase, because, that's one of the things that is different from high school to college, is that, you have to get to class and you have to, there's a lot more. They say that the average, if you have a class that's an hour, that there's 3 hours outside of class that you'll have to do work on that class. And so being disciplined, I think, is what I didn't do back in my first attempt at college. I wasn't very disciplined. I was the first time away from home. And I always make a joke that a residence hall is really kind of like a halfway house. You're away from home, but you're not totally independent. But still, it was a learning process for me that, we always emphasize, or I always emphasize, or sometimes tend to overemphasize how important it is to, to study and to go to class and to get help and to go to tutoring. But part of the college experience, whether you have a disability or not, is to have some fun and being able to balance that, because college should be a enjoyable experience. There's so many clubs, there's so many, you can go to games, there's so many networks that students have. People that I went to college with whenever I was in undergrad, I've still maintained contact with in my graduate program. And so there's that social piece of it that oftentimes folks don't really realize that's important for us folks with disabilities.
Well, Matt, is there anything else we haven't spoke about that I might not have asked that you'd like students who might be in college now or students thinking about going to college? Is there anything you'd like them to know that maybe we haven't talked about?
I think it's okay sometimes if you're not ready for, or if you're not ready for a big college atmosphere. It's certainly a great idea. I did this years ago, is taking maybe some core classes at your local community college, getting in touch with the disability services there, get some classes that everyone's going to have to take that they'll transfer over, maybe even if you don't want to take a full load, which is usually 4 classes at the college level, to go part-time just to see how that's going to go. And then you can always ease up to a full-time status. So that's my advice, is to not be afraid of just jumping into a big campus or to take, so many classes that it may seem overwhelming, but it's certainly reasonable to ease into that type of situation. And that would be my best advice, and to not let your own fears keep you from doing what you are passionate about, because the best way to do something that you're passionate about is to get connected with those who are at the college community and all the resources that are available, and we can together kind of make this happen. Everybody's different. Everybody's plan is different. And that's why we don't have a cookie cutter way of helping students, but just ask for the help, ask questions, and that would be probably my best advice.
Wow, Matt, you have been a wealth of information. I've enjoyed having you on the podcast today. Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thanks to Chris Unkin for our theme music. Thanks to Steve Moore for providing our transcription. Support comes from the Center for Accessible Living in Louisville, Kentucky. And you can find links to buy the book, A Celebration of Family, Stories of Parents with Disabilities, in our show notes. Thanks, everyone.
Just for once, I think I would agree. We both know there's a difference. We've had our curtain call. This time the writing's on the wall. War of words we can't defend. Two damaged hearts refuse to mend. This situation's pointless with each and every day. It's not a game we need to play. Try to make things better, repair and rearrange things, but each and every letter spells out the need for us to open up our minds and hearts to change. disregard for good to set us free. There's just no way of knowing if love lives anymore. Turn out the light, then close the door. We tried to make things better, repair and rearrange things, but each and every letter spells out the need for us to open